But family remained important to me in ways I couldn't fully explain or dismiss. These were the people who'd raised me, who'd attended my high school graduation and college graduation, who'd taught me to ride a bike and drive a car. They were also the people who'd apparently decided somewhere along the way that I was destined for mediocrity and disappointment. Emma Rodriguez, my best friend since college and the only person who knew the full truth about my career, had stopped being diplomatic about my family situation years ago. "Jess, you're the CEO of a major defense contractor," she'd said during our last girls' night out. "You have a corner office on the 20th floor of a downtown high-rise. You drive a BMW and own a condo that costs more than most people's houses. Why do you keep letting them treat you like you're some kind of failure?" The answer was complicated and rooted in something deeper than professional success or financial achievement. Part of me still craved their approval, still wanted to be seen and valued by the people who'd known me longest. Part of me held on to hope that eventually they'd recognize what I'd accomplished and feel proud instead of worried. And part of me, the part I rarely acknowledged even to myself, was afraid that if I revealed the truth about my success, they'd find new reasons to disapprove of me. Because the truth was that my lifestyle had changed dramatically over the past few years. The BMW Emma mentioned was actually a Mercedes that I'd bought without financing because I could afford to pay cash. The condo wasn't just expensive. It was a penthouse with a view of the entire city skyline. I wore designer suits to work not because I was pretentious, but because my position required me to meet with people who noticed such things, and projecting authority was part of my job description. I traveled frequently for work, sometimes internationally, staying in hotels that cost more per night than my parents spent on groceries in a month. I ate at restaurants where a single meal exceeded what they considered reasonable spending for a week. I lived in a world of company cars and expense accounts, of first-class flights and VIP access, of opportunities and experiences that would have seemed fictional to the family that raised me. But I also worked 70-hour weeks regularly, carried the weight of decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in contracts, and dealt with stress levels that sometimes kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling. Success at my level came with sacrifices and responsibilities that were invisible to outsiders, but felt overwhelming on difficult days. The disconnect had become so pronounced that I'd started living two completely separate lives. In Columbus, I was Jessica Thompson, Chief Executive Officer, strategic leader, respected professional. In Riverside, I was still just Jess, the daughter who'd never quite figured out what she wanted to be when she grew up. The 4th of July weekend that would change everything started like all the others. My mother called 3 weeks in advance to confirm I'd be attending the annual Thompson family barbecue, using that particular tone that suggested my presence was expected rather than simply hoped for. "You'll be there, won't you, honey?" she'd said during our brief Tuesday evening phone call. "Your cousin Sarah is bringing her new baby, and Uncle Tom wants to show off his new boat. It'll be nice to have the whole family together." I'd confirmed my attendance while scrolling through emails on my laptop, half listening to her detailed description of the menu planning and weather forecast. These gatherings had become routine obligations rather than anticipated events, but they were important to my parents and therefore important to maintaining family relationships. The week leading up to the barbecue had been particularly intense, at work. We were in the final stages of negotiating a contract renewal worth $250 million over 5 years, and several key details required my direct involvement. I'd spent Monday morning in a video conference with Pentagon officials, Tuesday afternoon reviewing technical specifications with our engineering team, and Wednesday evening on a call with our legal department about compliance requirements. By Thursday, I was exhausted but satisfied with our progress. The contract was essentially finalized, pending only a few minor administrative details. Colonel Patricia Martinez, our primary military liaison and one of the most respected officers I'd ever worked with, had personally commended our team's performance during the negotiation process. "Jessica, I want you to know that your leadership, "On this project has been exemplary," she'd said during our final review meeting. "The Pentagon doesn't often work with contractors who demonstrate this level of professionalism and strategic thinking. Your company should be proud of what you've accomplished here." Coming from Colonel Martinez, whose military career spanned 3 decades and included tours in some of the world's most challenging environments, that praise meant more to me than any financial bonus or corporate recognition. She was someone who commanded respect through competence and integrity, qualities I tried to emulate in my own leadership style. Friday afternoon, I left the office early to prepare for the weekend in Riverside. I changed from my usual business, attire into jeans and a casual blouse, packed an overnight bag with clothes that wouldn't seem too expensive or out of place, and made the 45-minute drive to my childhood home. The house on Maple Street looked exactly the same as it had throughout my adolescence. 2 stories of white vinyl siding with blue shutters, a front porch with hanging baskets of petunias, and a meticulously maintained lawn that my father treated like a personal reflection of his character. The driveway was already crowded with familiar cars belonging to various aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd arrived early to help with preparations. I parked on the street and grabbed my bag, mentally preparing myself for the weekend ahead. These gatherings followed predictable patterns. I'd be asked about my job in vague terms that allowed for vague answers. Someone would inquire about my dating life and express concern about my single status. My achievements would be politely acknowledged and quickly overshadowed by discussions of Michael's latest promotion prospects or Ashley's wedding plans. The backyard was already bustling with activity when I walked through the back gate. My father stood at his position of honor behind the grill, wearing his favorite Kiss the Cook apron and holding court with my uncles about the proper technique for achieving the perfect burger. My mother moved efficiently between the kitchen and the picnic tables, coordinating side dishes and ensuring everyone had drinks. Michael and his wife Jennifer sat at one of the tables with their 2 young children, looking like a Norman Rockwell painting of American family life. Ashley and her new husband David were helping arrange chairs and setting up the folding tables that would accommodate our extended family. The scene was warm and welcoming in ways that made me remember why I continued making these trips despite the underlying tensions. These people loved me, even if they didn't understand me. They'd shaped who I was in fundamental ways, even if they couldn't see who I'd become. "Jess." Ashley spotted me first and rushed over with a hug that lifted me slightly off the ground. "I'm so glad you're here." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The moment my father said those words in front of our entire extended family, I knew everything was about to change forever. "Jessica's always been the useless one," he announced with a laugh, flipping burgers on the grill while 23. Relatives nodded in agreement. "Can't even hold down a real job like her brother and sister." What he didn't know was that Colonel Martinez was pulling into our driveway at that exact moment, about to deliver news that would shatter every assumption my family had ever made about me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Thompson, and for 28 years, I've been the family disappointment. Not the golden child like my older brother Michael with his accounting degree and suburban house. Not the pride and joy like my younger sister Ashley with her nursing career and recent wedding. Just Jessica, the one who wastes her time in some fancy office and thinks she's too good for honest work. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so painful. While my family saw me as the black sheep who moved to the big city and forgot her roots, the truth was far more complicated. Every morning, I woke up in my downtown Columbus apartment and drove to a nondescript building where I oversaw a team of 300 employees as the youngest chief executive officer in the history of Meridian Defense Solutions. My company held contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars with the Department of Defense. I had security clearance that allowed me access to classified information most people would never dream of seeing. Foreign dignitaries knew my name. Pentagon officials had my direct number. But to my parents, Bob and Linda Thompson of Riverside, Ohio, I was still just their screw-up daughter who wore suits instead of scrubs or work boots. The deception hadn't started intentionally. When I first landed the junior analyst position at Meridian fresh out of college, I tried to explain the nature of my work to my family during Sunday dinner at the old house on Maple Street. My father had interrupted before I could finish my second sentence about defense contractors and government partnerships. "Sounds like a lot of fancy talk for pushing papers," he'd said, reaching for another dinner roll. "When are you going to get a real job like your brother? Michael's got benefits, pension, the whole 9 yards. That's security, Jess. Not whatever. This is." My mother had nodded in agreement, her voice taking on that particular tone she reserved for lectures about my life choices. "Honey, you know we just want what's best for you. These corporate jobs, they're not stable. Look at Ashley. She's helping people every day as a nurse. That's meaningful work. That's something you can be proud of." I'd tried to explain that my work was meaningful, that national defense mattered, that I was good at what I did, and advancing quickly. But the more I talked, the more their eyes glazed over. They heard buzzwords and corporate jargon where I meant strategy and leadership. They saw pretension where I felt passion. Eventually, I stopped trying to make them understand and started giving vague answers about working in an office downtown. The pattern established itself early and deepened over the years. Every family gathering became an exercise in deflection and diminished expectations. When Michael bought his first house at 26, my parents threw him a celebration party and invited half the neighborhood. When Ashley graduated nursing school, they framed her diploma and hung it in the living room next to Michael's accounting degree. When I was promoted to department head at 24, managing 40 people and a budget larger than both my siblings' annual salaries combined, I mentioned it casually over coffee and watched my mother change the subject to Ashley's new boyfriend. The worst part wasn't the lack of recognition. It was the constant criticism disguised as concern. Every phone conversation included questions about when I was going to settle down and find something stable. Every family dinner featured pointed comments about my clothes being too expensive, my apartment being too fancy, my lifestyle being unsustainable. They worried about me the way you worry about a teenager making bad decisions, not the way you worry about a successful adult navigating a demanding career. My brother Michael never missed an opportunity to reinforce their perception. He'd graduated with a solid 3.2 GPA and landed a position at a mid-sized accounting firm where he'd worked for 6 years, slowly climbing from junior associate to senior associate. It was steady, predictable work that our parents understood and respected. During family gatherings, he'd hold court about his latest audit project or the new software his firm was implementing, speaking with the authority of someone whose career made sense to everyone listening. "The thing about corporate America," he'd say, shooting meaningful glances in my direction, "is that it's all smoke and mirrors. These big companies make promises they can't keep, promote people too fast, create these inflated titles that don't mean anything. Real career growth happens in stable industries where you build relationships and prove yourself over time." My parents would nod approvingly while I sat there knowing that my annual bonus exceeded his entire salary, that I'd been featured in Defense Industry Quarterly as one of the top leaders under 30, that I regularly briefed senior military officials on strategic initiatives that would shape national security for decades. But saying any of that would have sounded exactly like the kind of inflated corporate nonsense Michael was criticizing. Ashley, bless her heart, meant well, but somehow made things worse with her attempts at sisterly support. "Jess is doing great in her own way," she'd say with the kind of patronizing smile you'd give a child showing you a crayon drawing. Not everyone needs to follow traditional paths. Some people are meant to be more creative, more artistic. There's nothing wrong with office work if that's what makes you happy. Artistic, as if analyzing weapons systems efficiency and negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts was finger painting. The isolation grew heavier with each passing year. I had friends in Columbus, colleagues who understood my world, a life that made sense outside the confines of Riverside. Wait until you see the dessert I made. I tried that new recipe from the Food Network, and David says it's better than restaurant quality. I hugged her back, genuinely happy to see her enthusiasm and energy. Ashley had always been the family. Optimist, finding joy in small accomplishments and spreading that joy to everyone around her. Her nursing career suited her perfectly because she genuinely cared about helping people and making their days brighter. "Can't wait to try it," I said, setting my bag down near the back door. "How's married life treating you?" "Oh my gosh, it's amazing," she gushed, grabbing David's hand as he approached. "David is the best husband ever. He does the dishes without being asked. He brings me coffee in bed on weekends, and he even learned how to fold fitted sheets properly. Mom says she's never seen me so happy." David smiled with the contentment of a man who'd found his perfect match. "Ashley makes everything better," he said simply. "I'm the lucky one." Their happiness was infectious and genuine, the kind of uncomplicated joy that reminded me there were different types of success and fulfillment in life. They might not have corner offices or six-figure salaries, but they had something equally valuable in their partnership and shared sense of purpose. My mother appeared beside us carrying a pitcher of lemonade and wearing the floral apron that had been her barbecue uniform for as long as I could remember. "Jessica, sweetheart, you look tired. Are you getting enough sleep? You know what they say about burning the candle at both ends." It was a typical mom greeting, equal parts affection and concern with an undertone of disapproval about lifestyle choices she didn't fully understand. I kissed her cheek and accepted a glass of lemonade, tasting the perfect balance of sweet and tart that she'd perfected over decades of family gatherings. "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy at work. You know how it is." She gave me the look that suggested she didn't, in fact, know how it was, but was willing to accept my explanation for the sake of family harmony. "Well, you're here now, and that's what matters. Go say hello to your father and then help me get the salads organized. We're expecting 32 people this year." The next few hours unfolded with the comfortable familiarity of family tradition. I caught up with cousins I saw twice a year, admired photographs of new babies and vacation trips, and listened to Uncle Tom's detailed explanation of his new boat's engine specifications. The conversations were pleasant but superficial, touching, on safe topics that wouldn't lead to uncomfortable questions or awkward silences. My father held court at the grill with his usual mixture of expertise and entertainment, telling jokes that had been funny 20 years ago and offering unsolicited advice about everything from lawn care to career planning. He was in his element during these gatherings, surrounded by family members who appreciated his humor and respected his opinions. "Jessica, come over here," he called as I passed by carrying a tray of hamburger buns. "Tell Uncle Bill about that office job of yours. He's thinking about getting his daughter into some kind of corporate work." Uncle Bill looked at me expectantly, clearly hoping for practical advice about entry-level opportunities and career advancement strategies. The request was innocuous enough, but it highlighted the fundamental disconnect between perception and reality that defined most of my family interactions. "Well," I began carefully, "there are lots of different types of corporate work. What kind of field is she interested in?" "She's got a business degree," Uncle Bill explained. "Nothing too specific, just general business. She's been working at the mall for a couple years, but she wants something with better benefits and more professional growth opportunities." I could have recommended several excellent entry-level programs at companies I worked with regularly. I could have offered to review her resume or provide networking connections that might lead to interviews. Instead, I found myself giving generic advice about job search websites and the importance of professional presentation during interviews. "The key is persistence," I said, repeating wisdom that was true but insufficient. Keep applying, follow, up on applications, and don't get discouraged if it takes time to find the right fit." Uncle Bill nodded thoughtfully, but I could see the disappointment in his expression. He'd hoped for insider knowledge or specific opportunities, not platitudes about persistence and positive attitudes. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I was left with the familiar feeling of having failed to be as helpful as I could have been. As the afternoon progressed, the subtle criticisms began surfacing in ways that felt both familiar and increasingly difficult to tolerate. Michael made pointed comments about the importance of building long-term relationships in stable industries. My mother expressed concern about my single status and suggested I might have better luck meeting someone if I lived in a smaller town where people valued traditional relationships. "I just worry that you're missing out on what's really important," she said while we arranged desserts on the buffet table. "Career success is nice, honey, but it doesn't keep you warm at night. Ashley found someone wonderful because she stayed close to home and maintained connections with people who share her values." The implication that my values were somehow misaligned with relationship success stung more than it should have. I'd dated several men over the past few years, but the demands of my career and the complexity of my life made relationships challenging. Most men were either intimidated by my professional success or attracted to it for the wrong reasons. Finding someone who saw me as an equal partner rather than a trophy or a threat had proven more difficult than anticipated. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, arranging Ashley's elaborate dessert creation on a prominent position at the center of the table. "I'm focused on my career right now, and when the right person comes along, I'll know." She patted my arm with the kind of sympathy reserved for people facing disappointing circumstances beyond their control. "Of course, dear. I just want you to be happy." The assumption that I wasn't happy, that my life was somehow incomplete or unfulfilling, reflected the broader family narrative about my choices and priorities. In their view, professional success without traditional relationship milestones represented a consolation prize rather than a deliberate life path. By late afternoon, as the extended family began arriving for the main event, I found myself retreating into the role I'd perfected over years of these gatherings. I smiled and laughed at appropriate moments, asked interested questions about other people's lives, and deflected attention from my own circumstances with practiced ease. The irony wasn't lost on me that someone who regularly commanded rooms, full of senior executives and military officials, felt most comfortable blending into the background during family celebrations. But the skills were transferable in unexpected ways. Reading group dynamics, managing personalities, and maintaining diplomatic relationships served me well in both conference rooms and backyard barbecues. As evening approached and the conversation turned toward wrapping up the festivities, I felt the familiar mixture of relief and melancholy that marked the end of these family obligations. I'd successfully navigated another gathering without major conflict or uncomfortable revelations, but I'd also spent an entire day pretending to be a diminished version of myself. What I didn't know was that everything was about to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. Colonel Martinez's unexpected arrival would shatter the carefully constructed barriers between my two worlds and force my family to confront assumptions they'd held for years. But for now, I stood in my parents' backyard, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where I'd grown up, feeling like a stranger in my own family story. The tension started building the morning after the barbecue, though I didn't recognize it at first. I woke up early in my childhood bedroom, sunlight streaming through the same flowered curtains that had been there since high school, and checked my phone to find 17 missed calls from Emma and a string of increasingly urgent text messages. "Jess, call me immediately. Something big happened at Meridian yesterday." "Where are you? Jenkins is looking for you." "This is huge. Pentagon called an emergency meeting." "OMG, the contract just got fast-tracked. They want signatures Monday." My stomach dropped as I scrolled through the messages. The contract we'd been negotiating for months, the one I thought was safely in its final administrative phase, had apparently taken an unexpected turn. I slipped quietly out of the house and walked to the end of the block before calling Emma back. "Thank God," she answered on the first ring. "Where have you been? Jenkins has been calling everyone trying to reach you." Marcus Jenkins was our chief operating officer and my direct report to the board of directors. If he was trying to reach me on a Saturday morning, something significant had happened. "I'm at my parents' house. What's going on?" The Pentagon moved up their timeline. They want to finalize everything by Tuesday instead of next month. Apparently, there's some kind of geopolitical situation developing, and they need our technology deployed faster than originally planned. Colonel Martinez has been trying to coordinate with you personally. I closed my eyes and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. This was the reality of my position that my family would never understand. When national security was involved, weekends and family obligations became secondary considerations. "What do they need from me specifically?" "Your signature on the final documents, obviously, but also your presence at a briefing Monday morning. High-level stuff, Jess. Like, really high level. Colonel Martinez mentioned that some Pentagon brass wants to meet the CEO who put this deal together." The irony was almost laughable. Here I was, standing on a suburban street corner in Riverside while military officials in Washington were planning meetings around my schedule. My parents were probably in the kitchen making pancakes and wondering why I'd disappeared so early. "Okay, I can drive back this afternoon and be ready for Monday. Email me the details and I'll review everything." On the road, already sent. "And Jess, this is going to be huge for your career. Martinez said she's never seen the Pentagon move this fast on a civilian contractor agreement. Whatever you did during those negotiations, it impressed the right people." After hanging up, I stood there for a moment processing the magnitude of what Emma had told me. This wasn't just another contract renewal. This was the kind of deal that would establish Meridian as a premier defense contractor for decades to come. It was also the kind of achievement that would typically be celebrated with champagne and congratulations, shared with family and friends, who understood its significance. Instead, I walked back to the house where my father was indeed making pancakes, while my mother sorted through leftover food from yesterday's barbecue. They looked up when I entered, and I could see the question in their expressions about where I'd been. "Just taking a walk," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot my mother always had ready. "Beautiful morning." "You're up early for a Saturday," Dad observed, flipping a pancake with practiced ease. "Everything okay at work? You seem a little tense." The question presented an opportunity to share what was happening, to explain that I needed to return to Columbus because of an urgent situation involving millions of dollars and national security priorities. Instead, I found myself falling back into the familiar pattern of evasion. "Just some things I need to take care of. I might head back a little earlier than planned." My mother's face showed immediate disappointment. "But we were going to spend the day together. I thought we could go shopping, maybe have lunch at that new cafe downtown. We so rarely get time just the two of us." The guilt was immediate and sharp. She was right. We rarely had time together. And part of that was because I'd been so focused on career advancement that family relationships had taken a back seat. But the other part was that spending extended time together often led to conversations about my life choices that left both of us feeling frustrated and misunderstood. "Maybe next time, Mom. This is kind of urgent." "It always is," she said with a sigh that carried years of accumulated disappointment. "I just don't understand what could be so important that it can't wait until Monday." "Because you don't understand what I do," I thought but didn't say. "Because you think I push papers in some generic office building instead of managing contracts that affect national security. Because if I told you the truth, you'd either not believe me or find new reasons to disapprove of my choices. Work can be unpredictable sometimes," I said instead, accepting the plate of pancakes Dad handed me and trying to project calm normalcy. The rest of the morning passed in a strange suspension between two worlds. I helped my mother reorganize the refrigerator, listened to my father's detailed analysis of yesterday's family dynamics, and participated in the kind of domestic routine that felt both comforting and suffocating. All the while, my phone buzzed intermittently with messages from colleagues preparing for Monday's meetings. Around noon, Ashley and David stopped by to say goodbye before heading back to their apartment. Ashley was still glowing with the happiness of newlywed life, full of stories about their morning walk and plans for redecorating their spare bedroom. "We're thinking about turning it into a nursery eventually," she confided while we sat on the front porch swing. "Not immediately, of course. But David and I both want kids, and it's nice to start planning ahead." The assumption that family planning was a topic we naturally shared highlighted another aspect of the disconnect I felt during these visits. Ashley's life followed patterns that made sense to our parents, moving through recognizable milestones at appropriate intervals. Marriage, house, career, children, all unfolding in ways that could be easily understood and celebrated. My life, by contrast, was full of achievements and experiences that didn't translate into familiar categories. I'd accomplished things that most people my age couldn't imagine, but I'd done it in a world that remained largely invisible to my family. The result was that I often felt like I was living someone else's life during these visits, playing a role that bore little resemblance to my actual identity. "That sounds wonderful," I said, meaning it sincerely. "You and David will make great parents." "What about you?" she asked, with the innocent curiosity of someone who assumed everyone shared similar goals and timelines. "Do you ever think about settling down, maybe moving back closer to home? I know Mom and Dad would love to have you nearby." The question touched on everything I couldn't easily explain about my life and choices. Moving back to Riverside would mean giving up a career I'd spent years building, abandoning opportunities that might never come again, and returning to a place where my accomplishments would be minimized or misunderstood. But saying that out loud would sound like I was rejecting not just a geographical location, but the people and values that had shaped me. "I like my life in Columbus," I said carefully. "My work is there, my friends, everything I've built. Maybe someday things will change, but for now I'm happy where I am." Ashley nodded with the kind of understanding that suggested she heard something different from what I'd actually said. "Of course, you need to do what feels right for you. I just think you'd be surprised how fulfilling it can be to have roots, to be part of a community where people really know you." The irony was that I was part of a community where people knew me, but it was a community my family couldn't or wouldn't recognize as valid. My colleagues at Meridian knew me as a strategic thinker and effective leader. Military officials knew me as someone whose word could be trusted in high-stakes negotiations. Industry contacts knew me as a rising star who'd accomplished remarkable things at a young age. But to my family, I remained Jessica, the confused young woman who'd somehow gotten sidetracked into corporate work instead of finding something more meaningful and stable. The gap between those perceptions seemed to widen, with each passing year, making conversations like this one feel like exercises in translation between different languages. After Ashley and David left, I made my excuses about needing to return to Columbus. My parents accepted the explanation with the resigned disappointment I'd come to expect, and I promised to call more often and visit again soon. The drive back to the city felt like traveling between dimensions, shifting from one version of myself to another with each mile that passed. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp energy that marked important days in my professional life. I dressed in my most authoritative suit, a charcoal gray Armani that had cost more than my parents spent on clothes in a year, and arrived at Meridian headquarters an hour early to review final documents and prepare for the Pentagon briefing. The building's 20th floor housed our executive offices, a world of glass and steel that looked out over the Columbus skyline. My corner office had views in two directions and enough space for a full conference table in addition to my desk and seating area. The walls displayed my degrees, industry awards, and photographs from various corporate events and government ceremonies. Emma was waiting with coffee and a folder of documents that required my immediate attention. Martinez called 20 minutes ago, she reported. She's driving down from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and should be here by 10. The Pentagon conference call is scheduled for 11, and Jenkins wants to brief you beforehand on some of the political implications. The why. Next few hours unfolded with the kind of intensity that made me feel most alive and capable. The contract details were complex, involving technological specifications that had taken months to negotiate, and financial terms that would position Meridian as a major player in the defense industry. My role was to provide strategic oversight and final approval, but also to represent the company in discussions with military officials who were accustomed to working with CEOs decades older and more experienced than me. Colonel Martinez arrived precisely on time, her military bearing and no-nonsense demeanor immediately commanding respect from everyone in the room. She was a woman in her late 40s who'd earned her position through competence and integrity, someone who'd broken barriers in the military while maintaining the highest professional standards. "Jessica," she said, shaking my hand with the firm grip that characterized all her interactions. "I want to personally thank you for the flexibility your company has shown in accelerating this timeline. The situation overseas has developed faster than we anticipated, and having this technology available months earlier than planned could make a significant difference." The briefing that followed revealed information I couldn't share with anyone outside the room, details about international developments that would eventually make headlines, but were currently known only to a select group of government and military officials. My company's technology would play a crucial role in maintaining American interests in a rapidly changing global landscape. The Pentagon is impressed with Meridian's performance throughout this process, Colonel Martinez continued. Your negotiation team demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking and adaptability we need in civilian partners. I've been authorized to discuss potential follow-up contracts that could extend this relationship for years to come. The meeting concluded with handshakes and commitments that would reshape my company's future. As Colonel Martinez prepared to leave, she mentioned something that would prove more significant than either of us realized at the time. "I have family in Ohio," she said casually while gathering her papers. "My sister lives in a little town called Riverside. I try to visit when I'm in the area. Small world, isn't it?" I felt a chill of premonition that I couldn't quite explain. "Riverside is where I grew up," I said slowly. "My parents still live there." "Really? What are the odds?" She smiled with genuine warmth. "Maybe I'll run into them sometime. It's a close-knit community from what I've seen." After she left, I sat in my office trying to process everything that had happened. The contract was finalized, the company's future was more secure than ever, and my personal reputation in the defense industry had reached new heights. I should have felt triumphant, but instead I felt a growing sense of disconnection from the life I was supposed to be celebrating. The success felt hollow when I had no one to share it with who would truly understand its significance. Emma understood the business implications, but she wasn't family. My colleagues respected the achievement, but our relationships were ultimately professional. The people who'd known me longest and shaped who I was remained completely unaware of what I'd accomplished. That evening, I called my parents to check in and found myself once again deflecting questions about my work and life. My mother asked if I'd had a good day at the office, and I said yes without elaborating. My father mentioned that he'd seen a news report about defense spending and wondered if that affected my company, and I gave a vague response about government contracts being complicated. The conversation lasted 15 minutes and covered weather, family gossip, and plans for upcoming holidays. It was pleasant and superficial, full of the kind of affection that existed despite fundamental misunderstandings, rather than because of deep connection and shared experiences. After hanging up, I stood in my penthouse apartment looking out at the city lights and wondering how long I could continue living these parallel lives. The professional success felt increasingly meaningless when it remained invisible to the people whose approval I still craved despite my best efforts to outgrow that need. The next few weeks passed in a blur of follow-up meetings, media interviews, and industry recognition for the Meridian contract. Defense Industry Quarterly featured me on their cover with the headline, "Young Leader Reshapes Defense Contracting." The Columbus Business Journal named me Executive of the Year. 3 different industry organizations invited me to speak at their annual conferences. Each achievement felt significant in the moment, but somehow empty afterward when I had no one to share it with, who would genuinely celebrate the accomplishment. I bought a bottle of champagne to commemorate the magazine cover, then drank it alone while watching Netflix in my apartment. Emma noticed the shift in my mood during our weekly planning meetings. "You should be on top of the world right now," she observed one Thursday afternoon. "This is everything you've worked toward for years. Why do you seem so subdued about it?" The question touched on feelings I'd been trying to avoid examining too closely. Success without recognition from the people who mattered most felt like winning a game where no one was keeping score. Professional achievements had always been important to me, but they'd been even more important as a way of proving something to my family, of demonstrating that their assumptions about me were wrong. "I guess I thought it would feel different," I admitted. "More satisfying, more complete somehow." "Are you thinking about your family again?" Emma asked with the directness that characterized our friendship. "Because if you are, you need to either tell them the truth about your career or stop letting their opinions affect how you feel about your accomplishments." She was right, of course. But knowing what I should do and being able to do it were entirely different things. The patterns of our relationship had been established over years, and changing them would require conversations I wasn't sure I was ready to have. Meanwhile, my parents continued calling with their usual mixture of concern and gentle criticism. My mother worried that I was working too hard and missing out on relationships. My father suggested that I should consider looking for something more stable before the economy took a downturn. Michael mentioned during a family conference call that his firm was expanding and might have opportunities for someone with my background, assuming I was interested in real accounting work. The suggestions were well-intentioned, but based on such fundamental misunderstandings of my life and career that responding to them felt impossible. How could I explain that leaving my current position would mean walking away from opportunities that most people could only dream of? How could I describe the satisfaction of successfully managing complex negotiations with government officials without sounding arrogant or unrealistic? The breaking point came during a phone conversation with my mother 3 weeks after the Pentagon meeting. She'd called to discuss plans for Michael's birthday celebration, which would be held at the family house the following weekend. "We're planning something really special," she said with excitement that reminded me of my childhood, when family celebrations had felt magical rather than obligatory. "Jennifer is organizing a surprise party with all his old friends from high school and college. His boss is even coming to congratulate him on his latest promotion." Michael had been promoted to senior manager, a significant advancement in his firm that came with increased responsibility and a modest salary increase. It was exactly the kind of traditional career progression that our parents understood and valued, moving through clearly defined levels with recognizable titles and predictable benefits. "That sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely happy for my brother's success even as I felt the familiar sting of comparison. "He's worked hard for this." "He really has," my mother agreed. "And it's so nice to see him settling into a career that will provide long-term security. You know, Jess, it's never too late to consider a change if you're not happy with your current situation. Michael's firm is always looking for good people, and with your education, I'm sure they'd consider you for an entry-level position." Entry-level position. The phrase hung in the air like a physical blow. My mother was suggesting that I abandon a CEO position overseeing hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in contracts to start over in my brother's accounting firm at entry level. The suggestion was so far removed from reality that I couldn't immediately formulate a response. "I'm doing fine where I am, Mom," I managed finally. "I know you think you are, honey, but sometimes it's hard to see our own situations clearly. You've been at that office job for years now, and what do you have to show for it? No advancement, no real stability, no clear future. Meanwhile, Michael has been steadily building something solid and meaningful." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but I stopped really listening after that point. Instead, I found myself staring out my office window at the Columbus skyline and wondering how long I could continue pretending to be someone I wasn't for the sake of family harmony. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to Michael's birthday party as the family disappointment who worked some office job downtown. I was going as Jessica Thompson, Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Defense Solutions, accomplished professional and strategic leader whose work contributed to national security. The time for hiding was over. Whether my family could accept the truth about who I'd become was up to them, but I was done living two separate lives for their comfort. I had no idea that Colonel Martinez had already set events in motion that would make my decision irrelevant, that the truth would be revealed in ways I couldn't control or predict. But for the first time in years, I felt ready to face whatever consequences came with being completely honest about my life and achievements. The collision between my two worlds was about to happen whether I was prepared for it or not. Michael's birthday party was supposed to be perfect. The weather cooperated with bright sunshine and a gentle breeze that made the backyard feel like a postcard setting. My mother had outdone herself with decorations, stringing lights between the trees, and setting up buffet tables with white tablecloths that somehow managed to stay pristine despite the chaos of party preparation. I arrived fashionably late, having spent an extra hour in my Columbus apartment debating what to wear. The decision felt more significant than usual, because I'd made a private commitment to stop hiding who I was, even if I wasn't entirely sure how to reveal the truth. I'd settled on designer jeans and a silk blouse that looked casual but expensive, a compromise between my two identities. The backyard was already crowded with familiar faces from Michael's past and present. High school classmates who'd stayed in Riverside, college friends who'd moved to nearby cities, colleagues from his accounting firm who looked exactly like I'd imagined accountants would look. Everyone seemed comfortable and connected, sharing stories and inside jokes that created an atmosphere of easy camaraderie. Michael was in his element, moving between groups with the confidence of someone celebrating a meaningful achievement among people who understood its significance. His promotion to senior manager might not sound impressive to outsiders, but in this context, surrounded by people who knew his journey and valued stability over ambition, it represented exactly the kind of success that mattered. I found myself gravitating toward the edges of conversations, smiling and nodding at appropriate moments while feeling increasingly like an anthropologist studying a culture I'd once belonged to but no longer fully understood. These were good. People living good lives, but their world felt smaller and more constrained than it had when I'd been part of it. Jessica. My mother appeared beside me carrying a plate of hors d'oeuvres and wearing the expression of determined hostess cheerfulness. That meant she was working hard to ensure everyone felt included. "Come meet Michael's boss, Mr. Peterson. He's been asking about you." She guided me toward a heavyset man in his 60s who was deep in conversation with my father about lawn maintenance techniques. Mr. Peterson looked like Central Casting's version of a small-town accounting firm owner, complete with short-sleeved dress shirt and tie that had probably been fashionable a decade ago. "Mr. Peterson, this is our daughter Jessica," my mother announced with the pride she typically reserved for introducing my siblings. "She works in Columbus, in an office downtown." Mr. Peterson extended his hand with the firm grip of someone accustomed to making business connections at social gatherings. "Pleasure to meet you, Jessica. What kind of work do you do downtown?" The question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. This was my opportunity to begin telling the truth, to explain that I was the chief executive officer of a major defense contractor rather than some generic office worker. But standing in my parents' backyard, surrounded by people whose definition of professional success peaked at senior manager level, the truth felt almost absurd. "I work for a government contractor," I said, testing the waters with partial honesty. "We handle technology contracts for federal agencies." "Ah, government work," Mr. Peterson nodded knowingly. "Steady pay, good benefits. Smart choice in uncertain times. Michael tells me you might be interested in exploring opportunities in traditional accounting. We're always looking for people with government experience." My father joined the conversation, clearly proud to facilitate what he saw as a networking opportunity that might lead to his daughter finally finding stable employment. "Jessica's been in that corporate world for a while now, but I keep telling her there's something to be said for working with people you know and trust." The conversation continued around me while I struggled with the surreal experience of being discussed as if I were an entry-level job seeker, rather than someone who regularly briefed Pentagon officials and managed $100 million contracts. Mr. Peterson was kind and well-meaning, but his assumption that I would consider leaving my current position to join his small-town accounting firm revealed how completely my family had misrepresented my career and capabilities. "Government contracting can be unpredictable," he was saying. "Here today, gone tomorrow when administrations change. But accounting, that's always going to be necessary. People always need their books balanced and their taxes done." I murmured appropriate responses while mentally calculating that my annual bonus exceeded his firm's total revenue and wondering how long I could continue this charade without screaming or laughing hysterically. The disconnect between perception and reality had become so extreme that addressing it would require explanations that might sound delusional to people who had no frame of reference for my actual life. The party continued around us with the comfortable rhythm of small-town social gatherings. Ashley arrived with David and immediately began circulating with the ease of someone who genuinely enjoyed meeting new people and hearing their stories. Michael's high school friends shared memories of teenage adventures that made everyone laugh and reminisce about simpler times. I watched my brother accepting congratulations and well wishes with the satisfaction of someone whose achievements were perfectly understood and appropriately valued by everyone present. His promotion was significant within his context, representing years of steady work and professional growth that would provide security for his family and respect within his community. Part of me envied that clarity and connection, the way his success fit neatly into categories that everyone could recognize and celebrate. There was something appealing about a life where accomplishments were measured in familiar terms and shared with people who'd known you since childhood. But the larger part of me felt increasingly frustrated with my own situation, trapped between identities that seemed impossible to reconcile. I'd built a career that exceeded anything my teenage self could have imagined, but I'd done it in a world that remained invisible to the people whose opinions still mattered to me for reasons I couldn't fully understand or dismiss. The breaking point came during the cake ceremony, when my father called for everyone's attention to make a toast to Michael's success. The backyard fell quiet as family and friends gathered around the picnic tables where my mother had arranged an elaborate display of desserts centered around a professionally decorated cake. "I want to say how proud Linda and I are of our son Michael," my father began, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being heard and respected. "He's shown what it means to work hard, stay focused, and build something meaningful. At 30 years old, he's already achieved more than most people accomplish in a lifetime." The crowd murmured agreement, while Michael smiled with genuine pleasure at the recognition. Ashley beamed with sisterly pride, and David applauded enthusiastically, despite having known Michael for less than 2 years. "Michael represents everything. We tried to teach our children about the value of honest work and staying true to your roots," my father continued. "He could have chased after fancy corporate jobs or moved to some big city, but he chose to build his career here, among people who know him and value what he brings to the community." The implicit criticism of my choices was subtle, but unmistakable. To anyone who knew our family dynamics, While praising Michael for staying local and choosing stability, my father was simultaneously suggesting that alternative paths represented abandonment of family values and community connections. Some people think success means impressing strangers with fancy titles and expensive lifestyles, he said, his eyes briefly meeting mine across the gathered crowd. But real success is what Michael has achieved right here: a solid career, a loving family, and the respect of people who matter. The toast concluded with applause and cake serving, but I felt like I'd been publicly categorized as the example of misguided priorities and superficial achievements. The assumption that my career was somehow less meaningful or authentic than Michael's because it existed outside the boundaries of Riverside felt both unfair and deeply hurtful. I retreated to the house under the pretense of helping my mother with serving logistics, but really to escape the suffocating sense of being fundamentally misunderstood and undervalued by the people who were supposed to know me best. The kitchen provided temporary refuge, busy with the familiar chaos of party hosting, but separate from the social dynamics that were making me feel increasingly alienated. "You okay, honey?" my mother asked, noticing my distraction as we arranged additional plates and napkins. "You seem a little quiet today." The question opened a door I'd been keeping carefully closed for years. Standing in the kitchen where I'd helped with countless family celebrations, surrounded by the sights and smells of home, I felt an overwhelming urge to finally tell someone the truth about my life and accomplishments. "Mom, can I ask you something? Do you really think my career is meaningless compared to Michael's?" She looked startled by the directness of the question, setting down the stack of plates she'd been carrying and giving me her full attention for the first time all day. "Of course not, Jessica. Your father didn't mean it that way. We just worry about you, that's all. You seem so isolated in that big city, working for people who don't really know you. Michael has built something here, with us, where he belongs. But what if I belong somewhere else? What if what I've built is actually bigger and more important than what Michael has accomplished, but you just can't see it because it's not the kind of success you understand?" The words came out more confrontational than I'd intended, charged, with years of accumulated frustration and disappointment. My mother's expression shifted from confusion to concern, the way she might look at a child having an emotional breakdown over something that seemed disproportionately upsetting. "Honey, I think you might be feeling a little overwhelmed right now. It's natural to feel competitive with your siblings sometimes, especially when they're being celebrated, but comparing your situations isn't fair to either of you." The gentle condescension in her tone was somehow worse than outright dismissal would have been. She was treating my frustration as emotional instability rather than legitimate grievance, assuming that my career dissatisfaction stemmed from sibling rivalry, rather than being fundamentally misunderstood and undervalued. "It's not about competition, Mom. It's about recognition. It's about being seen for who I actually am, instead of who you think I should be." Before she could respond, Ashley appeared in the kitchen doorway with an expression of cheerful concern. That suggested she'd overheard part of our conversation. "Everything okay in here? You both look pretty serious for a party." My mother immediately shifted into protective mode, the way she had when we were children and one of us was upset, but she didn't want to alarm the others. "Jessica's just feeling a little tired. It's been a long week at work." The dismissal was gentle but complete, reducing my career frustrations to simple fatigue that could be solved with rest and perspective. Ashley nodded sympathetically and offered to help with whatever needed doing, effectively ending any possibility of continuing the conversation I'd been trying to start. We returned to the party carrying fresh supplies and renewed commitment to maintaining family harmony, but I felt more isolated than ever. The brief attempted honesty had been deflected so smoothly that I wondered if I'd imagined the entire exchange. My family's ability to avoid uncomfortable topics while maintaining surface-level pleasantness was so well developed that challenging it felt almost impossible. The afternoon wore on with the predictable rhythm of successful gatherings. People ate too much, drank moderately, and shared stories that would become part of family mythology. Michael's colleagues talked shop about upcoming changes in tax law and client management strategies. His high school friends reminisced about football games and prom dates that seemed simultaneously ancient and immediate. I found myself watching the interactions with anthropological detachment, observing how easily everyone seemed to connect over shared experiences and common reference points. There was something enviable about belonging to a community where your history was known and your context was understood, where achievements could be celebrated because they fit into familiar categories of success and progress. But there was also something limiting about that same familiarity, the way it created expectations and boundaries that might prevent someone from exploring possibilities beyond the community's collective imagination. I'd chosen a different path, partly because I'd wanted to test my capabilities against larger challenges and broader opportunities, but that choice had come with costs I was only beginning to fully understand. As evening approached and the party began winding down, I helped with cleanup while making polite conversation with departing guests. Mr. Peterson shook my hand goodbye and reminded me that his firm was always looking for people with government experience. Michael's high school friends promised to stay in touch and invited me to join them for drinks next time I was in town. The invitations were genuine and well-meaning, but they felt like offers to rejoin a world I'd outgrown rather than acknowledgments of the world I'd actually built. Everyone seemed to assume that my current life was temporary or unsatisfying, something I'd eventually abandon in favor of returning to more familiar patterns and expectations. After the last guests had departed and the backyard had been restored to its usual state, my family gathered in the living room for the kind of post-party decompression that had been our tradition for as long as I could remember. Michael and Jennifer settled onto the couch with their children. Ashley and David claimed the love seat, and my parents took their customary chairs while I perched on the ottoman that had served as overflow seating throughout my childhood. The cue. Conversation covered the usual topics. Who had said what to whom? Which stories had been particularly entertaining? How much food had been left over? Michael thanked our parents for organizing such a wonderful celebration and expressed genuine appreciation for the effort they'd put into making his day special. "It means everything to have family support," he said, reaching over to squeeze Jennifer's hand. "Knowing that you're proud of what I've accomplished, that you understand why it matters, that makes all the difference." The comment wasn't directed at me, but I felt its implications like a physical weight. The assumption that his achievements were more worthy of family pride because they were more easily understood highlighted everything I'd been struggling with about my own relationship with success and recognition. "We are proud," my father confirmed. "You've built exactly the kind of life we hoped for all our children. Steady, meaningful, connected to community and family." The phrase "all our children" hung in the air with obvious implications about which children had and hadn't achieved those ideals. I sat there feeling like a disappointing footnote to the family success story, the cautionary tale about what happened when someone chose ambition over stability and independence over community connection. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling I'd memorized during countless sleepless nights of adolescent angst, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done pretending to be less than I was for the sake of family comfort. If they couldn't accept or understand my actual achievements, that was their limitation, not my failure. I had no way of knowing that the universe was about to make my decision irrelevant, that events were already in motion that would force the truth into the open in ways I couldn't control or predict. Colonel Martinez's casual mention of having family in Riverside had set in motion a chain of coincidences that would shatter the careful barriers I'd maintained between my two worlds. But that night, all I knew was that I was tired of being treated like the family disappointment when I'd actually achieved things that surpassed anyone's expectations. The time for hiding was over, whether I was ready for the consequences or not. The revelation would come sooner than I expected, in ways I couldn't have imagined, changing everything I thought I knew about family, success, and what really mattered in life. But for now, I lay in the darkness, making plans to finally tell The truth about who I'd become and what I'd accomplished, regardless of how my family chose to respond. Tomorrow would bring conversations I'd been avoiding for years, but tonight I felt the strange peace that comes with finally deciding to stop. Running from difficult truths. Whatever happened next, at least it would be honest. The phone call came at 6:30 in the morning, jolting me awake in my childhood bedroom with the urgency that always accompanied work emergencies. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, trying to orient myself between the familiar surroundings of home and the demanding reality of my professional responsibilities. "Jessica, thank God you answered." Emma's voice carried a level of excitement I rarely heard from my typically composed assistant. "You need to get back here immediately. Something incredible has happened." I sat up in bed, instantly alert despite the early hour. "What's going on?" "The Pentagon called an hour ago. They want to accelerate our timeline again, but this time it's even bigger. They're talking about a multi-year partnership that could make Meridian the primary contractor for an entire category of defense technology. Colonel Martinez specifically requested that you lead the presentation team." The magnitude of what Emma was describing hit me like a physical force. This wasn't just another contract renewal or even a significant expansion of our existing relationship. This was the kind of opportunity that could transform Meridian from a successful regional contractor into a major national player in the defense industry. "When do they want to meet?" "That's the thing," Emma said, her voice rising with excitement. "Colonel Martinez is driving down this morning to brief you personally before the formal presentation. She said she has news that couldn't wait for normal business channels. Jessica, I think this is going to be huge." I glanced at the clock and calculated travel time back to Columbus. If I left within the hour, I could be at the office before Colonel Martinez arrived, but that would mean cutting short my weekend with family and probably raising questions I wasn't prepared to answer. "Tell her I'll be there by 9, I said, already mentally shifting into the focused mindset that complex negotiations required. Cancel everything else on my schedule and make sure the conference room is set up for a high-level briefing. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed, processing the implications of what Emma had told me. This opportunity could represent the culmination of everything I'd worked toward for years, the kind of achievement that would establish my reputation permanently and open doors I'd only dreamed about. But it was also happening on a weekend when I was supposed to be spending time with family, trying to rebuild connections that had been strained by years of secrecy and misunderstanding. The timing couldn't have been worse from a personal perspective, but professional opportunities of this magnitude didn't wait for convenient scheduling. I dressed quickly in clothes I'd brought for a casual family weekend, knowing I'd need to change into business attire once I reached Columbus. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was once again prioritizing work over family time, reinforcing exactly the kind of behavior patterns my parents found concerning and disappointing. Downstairs, I found my mother already awake and making coffee, in the kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and vanilla from whatever breakfast she was planning to prepare. She looked up when I entered, and I could see the disappointment register in her expression before she even spoke. "You're leaving early again, aren't you?" The question carried years of accumulated frustration about my perceived inability to prioritize family relationships over professional obligations. I'd heard variations of it countless times, always delivered with the patient sadness of someone who'd stopped expecting different behavior, but couldn't quite stop hoping for it. "Something urgent came up at work," I said, pouring coffee into a travel mug and trying to project calm authority rather than defensive guilt. "I need to be back in Columbus this morning." "It's always something urgent," she replied, not accusingly, but with the weary resignation of someone who'd had this conversation too many times. "When was the last time your job allowed you to spend an entire weekend with family without interruption?" The question touched on everything complicated about my relationship with both work and family. The truth was that my position required constant availability and frequent sacrifice of personal time, but it also provided opportunities and achievements that made those sacrifices feel worthwhile. Explaining that balance to someone who viewed career success in terms of steady hours and predictable schedules felt almost impossible. "This is different, Mom. This could be really important for my career." She nodded with the kind of understanding that suggested she'd heard similar explanations before and remained unconvinced by their validity. "I just worry that you're missing out on what really matters while chasing after things that might not be as important as they seem right now." The comment stung because it contained enough truth to be uncomfortable. I was missing family moments and personal connections in pursuit of professional achievements that my family couldn't understand or appreciate. But I was also building something significant and meaningful, contributing to work that mattered on levels they couldn't see or acknowledge. "What I do is important, Mom. Maybe not in ways you recognize, but it matters." She reached over and squeezed my hand with the kind of gentle affection that made me remember being comforted as a child during difficult moments. "I know you think it is, honey. I just hope someday you find something that fulfills you the way Michael's work fulfills him, or the way Ashley's nursing makes her feel useful and connected." The assumption that I wasn't fulfilled, or that my work lacked meaning compared to my siblings' careers, highlighted the fundamental disconnect that had been growing between us for years. She simply couldn't imagine that corporate success might provide its own forms of satisfaction and contribution, that leadership roles might offer their own opportunities for service and impact. I finished my coffee and gathered my belongings while my mother watched with the resigned expression of someone who'd learned not to expect different outcomes from repeated scenarios. Our goodbye hug felt weighted with unspoken disappointments and unresolved tensions, but also with genuine love that existed despite our inability to understand each other's choices. The drive back to Columbus gave me time to shift mental gears from family mode to professional focus, but it also provided unwelcome opportunity to reflect on the conversation with my mother. Her concerns weren't entirely wrong, even if they were based on incomplete information about my actual life and achievements. I was sacrificing personal relationships and family connections in pursuit of career advancement, and those sacrifices were becoming increasingly difficult to justify or maintain. The success felt hollow when I had no one to share it with who truly understood its significance. But the alternative seemed to be abandoning everything I'd worked for in favor of relationships that valued conformity over achievement. By the time I reached my office building, I'd managed to compartmentalize the family complications and focus entirely on the opportunity ahead. The 20th floor was nearly empty on a Sunday morning, but Emma had arrived early to prepare materials and ensure everything was ready for Colonel Martinez's visit. "She called again 20 minutes ago," Emma reported as I settled into my office to review relevant documents. "She's running about 15 minutes ahead of schedule and sounded more excited than I've ever heard her. Whatever this is about, it's big." I changed into the charcoal suit I kept in my office for unexpected meetings and spent the next hour reviewing everything we knew about current Pentagon priorities and defense industry trends. Colonel Martinez wasn't someone given to hyperbole or exaggeration, so her enthusiasm suggested something genuinely significant was developing. When she arrived, her military bearing was unchanged, but there was an energy in her demeanor that confirmed Emma's impression of unusual excitement. She carried a leather briefcase that looked official and important, the kind that contained documents requiring security clearances and confidentiality agreements. "Jessica, thank you for making time on short notice," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the efficient movement that characterized all her interactions. "What I'm about to discuss with you is still classified at the highest levels, but I've been authorized to brief you personally because of your company's performance on our recent contract." The briefing that followed revealed opportunities that exceeded anything I'd imagined possible for Meridian. The Pentagon was restructuring several major defense initiatives and consolidating contractors to work with fewer, more reliable partners. Our performance had positioned us to become the primary civilian contractor for an entire category of technology development that would span multiple years and hundreds of millions of dollars. "This isn't just about expanding our current relationship," Colonel Martinez explained, spreading documents across my desk that contained technical specifications and financial projections. This is about establishing Meridian as the Pentagon's preferred partner for this entire technology sector. Your company would essentially become the civilian face of several critical defense initiatives. The implications were staggering. This opportunity would transform Meridian from a successful regional contractor into a major national player virtually overnight. It would also establish my personal reputation as one of the youngest and most successful defense industry executives in the country, opening doors to opportunities I couldn't even imagine yet. There's one additional component I wanted to discuss with you personally, Colonel Martinez continued, her tone shifting to something more informal and conversational. As part of this partnership, the Pentagon wants to showcase successful civilian contractors to boost public confidence in defense spending. That would involve some media coverage and public appearances for key executives. The prospect of public recognition for my achievements felt both thrilling and terrifying. After years of hiding my success from my family, the idea of having it acknowledged publicly created complex emotions I wasn't sure how to process. What kind of media coverage are we talking about? Magazine interviews, industry publications, maybe some local news coverage highlighting successful businesses in the region. Nothing too invasive, but enough to demonstrate that taxpayer dollars are being managed by competent, trustworthy people. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing technical details and contractual requirements that would need to be finalized over the coming weeks. The complexity was enormous, but so was the potential for both company growth and personal achievement that would establish my career permanently. As Colonel Martinez prepared to leave, she mentioned something that would prove more significant than either of us realized at the time. "I'm driving back through Riverside on my way to Wright-Patterson," she said casually while gathering her documents. "My sister lives there, and I promised to stop by for dinner. It's such a nice community. Do your parents still live there?" "Yes, they do," I replied, feeling an odd chill of premonition that I couldn't quite explain. "My father was just saying yesterday how much he values the close-knit nature of small-town life. That's exactly what my sister loves about it. She moved there from Cincinnati 5 years ago and says it's the best decision she ever made. Everyone knows everyone, and people actually care about their neighbors." After she left, I remained in my office trying to process everything that had happened. The contract opportunity was beyond anything I'd dared hope for, the culmination of years of strategic planning and careful relationship building. In a few weeks, I would be leading negotiations that could reshape my entire industry and establish my reputation permanently. But I also felt the familiar disconnect between professional triumph and personal isolation. This achievement would be even more difficult to share with my family than previous successes, both because of its magnitude and because of the public attention it might generate. The irony was that Colonel Martinez's casual mention of visiting Riverside highlighted everything complicated about my relationship with my hometown and family. She saw it as a charming community full of caring people, which it was. But it was also a place where my actual achievements were invisible, and my life choices were viewed with concern rather than pride. That evening, I called my parents to check in and found myself once again deflecting questions about my sudden departure and weekend plans. My father asked if everything was all right at work, and I gave vague assurances about routine business matters. My mother wondered if I'd be able to visit again soon, and I promised to try but couldn't commit to specific dates. The conversation lasted 20 minutes and covered all the usual topics without touching on anything that really mattered about my life or theirs. It was pleasant and affectionate but ultimately superficial, full of the kind of careful navigation that had become our normal pattern of interaction. After hanging up, I stood in my penthouse apartment looking out at the city lights and wondering how much longer I could maintain these parallel existences. The professional success was becoming too significant to hide, but revealing it would require explanations and justifications that might create new forms of family tension. Emma called later that evening to discuss preliminary planning for the Pentagon presentation, her excitement barely contained even through the phone. "Jessica, do you realize what this means? This is going to put you on the map nationally. You'll be one of the most successful executives in the defense industry, and you're not even 30 yet." She was right, of course, but the achievement felt bittersweet when I imagined trying to explain it to people who'd never understood why I'd left Riverside in the first place. Success without recognition from the people who'd shaped me felt incomplete. But sharing it with them might create new complications I wasn't prepared to handle. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and planning for the Pentagon presentation. I worked 14-hour days reviewing technical specifications, financial projections, and strategic implications of the proposed partnership. The magnitude of the opportunity required absolute focus and complete commitment to ensuring our proposal exceeded every expectation. But even as I threw myself into the work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to change in ways I couldn't predict or control. Colonel Martinez's mention of visiting Riverside had triggered an unease I couldn't quite explain, as if the universe was preparing to force a confrontation between my two worlds that I'd been carefully avoiding. I had no way of knowing that she'd already mentioned our conversation to her sister during their dinner, that casual family gossip would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter the barriers I'd maintained for years. Small towns were exactly as connected as everyone said, and news about successful locals traveled faster than anyone expected. The revelation was coming whether I was ready for it or not, and it would arrive in ways that would transform not just my relationship with my family, but my understanding of what success really meant and what prices were worth paying for achievement. But for now, I focused on the work ahead, preparing for negotiations that would establish my career permanently while remaining blissfully unaware that everything was about to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. The 4th of July barbecue was supposed to be routine. Same backyard, same relatives, same predictable conversations about weather and work and who was dating whom. I'd driven down from Columbus that morning with mixed feelings, carrying a gift for my cousin Tommy's graduation and mentally preparing for another day of being the family underachiever who worked some office job downtown. What I hadn't anticipated was walking into the backyard to find my father holding court near the grill, his voice carrying across the entire gathering as he gestured expansively with his spatula. "I'm telling you, Bob, Jessica's never been able to stick with anything meaningful," he was saying to my Uncle Bob, while a circle of relatives nodded along. "She's always chasing these fancy corporate jobs, thinking she's too good for honest work like Michael and Ashley." The familiar sting of his disapproval hit me as I stood frozen near the back gate, gift bag in hand, listening to my own father catalog my perceived failures for the entertainment of our extended family. "The girl's 30 years old and still doesn't have a real career," he continued, flipping burgers with the confidence of someone whose opinions were rarely challenged. "Michael's got his CPA firm, Ashley's saving lives as a nurse, and what does Jessica have? Some paper-pushing job that she can't even explain properly." Aunt Carol chimed in with sympathetic head-shaking. "It's such a shame. She was always so bright in school. I thought she'd really make something of herself." "That's the problem," my father replied, warming to his theme. "Too much education, not enough common sense. She thinks because she went to some fancy college, she's better than the rest of us. But look where it's gotten her. 30 years old, no husband, no kids, no real accomplishments to speak of." Uncle Bill joined the conversation, his voice carrying the authority of someone dispensing wisdom. "These corporate jobs, they're all smoke and mirrors anyway. Give me someone with a trade any day. At least you know they can actually do something useful." The conversation continued, each participant adding their own observations about my perceived shortcomings and misguided life choices. I stood there listening to myself being dissected and dismissed by people who were supposed to love and support me, feeling my face burn with humiliation and anger. Jessica's always been the useless one. my father concluded with a laugh that cut through me like a blade. Can't even hold down a real job like her brother and sister. Always got her head in the clouds, thinking she's going to be somebody important. Someday. The words hit me like a physical blow. Useless. After everything I'd accomplished, everything I'd achieved, the man who'd raised me saw me as fundamentally useless. I stood there clutching Tommy's graduation gift, feeling like that insecure teenager who'd never been quite good enough, quite smart enough, quite successful enough to earn her father's respect. That's when I heard the car door slam in the driveway. I turned to see a black sedan with government plates pulling up behind the row of family cars. My heart stopped as I recognized the vehicle, and then completely ceased functioning when I saw Colonel Patricia Martinez stepping out, dressed in her formal military uniform, complete with ribbons and insignia that gleamed in the afternoon sun. She looked exactly like what she was, a high-ranking military officer accustomed to command and respect, someone whose presence automatically shifted the dynamics of any room she entered. Her bearing was unmistakably authoritative, her uniform pressed to perfection, her expression serious and purposeful. The backyard conversation died instantly as everyone turned to stare at this unexpected arrival. Colonel Martinez surveyed the eye, gathering with the kind of professional assessment that military officers develop over decades of reading situations and people. "Excuse me," she called out in the voice that had commanded briefing rooms full of Pentagon officials. "I'm looking for Jessica Thompson." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Every face in the backyard turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to curiosity to dawning awareness that something significant was happening. My father recovered first, stepping forward with the kind of protective instinct that parents develop regardless of their children's ages. "I'm her father, Bob Thompson. Is there some kind of problem?" Colonel Martinez's expression softened slightly, but her military bearing remained intact. "No problem at all, sir. I'm Colonel Patricia Martinez with the Department of Defense. I need to speak with Ms. Thompson about an urgent matter regarding her company's contract with the Pentagon." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, visible and undeniable, but so unexpected that no one seemed able to process their meaning immediately. Contract with the Pentagon, Department of Defense. The phrases were so far removed from anyone's understanding of my career that they might as well have been spoken in a foreign language. "I think there's been some mistake," my mother said, stepping up beside my father with the kind of polite confusion that good hostesses develop when unexpected situations arise. "Jessica works for a small company downtown. Nothing involving the government or military." Colonel Martinez turned her attention to me with the slight smile of someone who was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation she'd walked into. "Ms. Thompson, perhaps we could speak privately. The matter is somewhat sensitive." I found my voice somewhere in the depths of my shock and managed to respond with something approaching professional composure. "Of course, Colonel Martinez. Would you like to come inside?" But she shook her head, her expression shifting to something that looked almost like amusement. "Actually, given the circumstances, I think this conversation should be public. Your family deserves to understand exactly who they're related to." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a folder that I recognized as containing the final documentation for our Pentagon contract. The papers she spread on the picnic table were official and impressive, bearing seals and signatures that commanded immediate attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Martinez announced, her voice carrying the authority that had earned her respect throughout the military hierarchy. "Allow me to introduce you to Jessica Thompson, Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Defense Solutions, one of the Pentagon's most trusted and successful civilian contractors." The silence that followed was so profound that it seemed to absorb sound rather than simply represent its absence. I watched my family's faces as they struggled to process information that contradicted everything they thought they knew about my life and career. "I'm here today," Colonel Martinez continued, to personally congratulate Ms. Thompson on securing the largest defense contract in her company's history. The partnership we've just finalized will establish Meridian as the Pentagon's primary contractor for advanced technology systems, a deal worth over $400 million across the next 5 years. My father's spatula clattered to the ground as he stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Complete bewilderment mixed with dawning recognition that everything he'd believed about his daughter's life had been fundamentally wrong. Furthermore, Colonel Martinez said, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering official commendations, I want to personally recognize Ms. Thompson's exceptional leadership throughout our negotiations. Her strategic thinking and professional competence have impressed officials at the highest levels of the Department of Defense. She turned to address me directly, but her words were clearly intended for the entire gathering. Jessica, your company's performance has been exemplary. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking and reliable execution that our national security priorities require. The Pentagon considers Meridian one of our most valuable civilian partners. The formal praise continued for several more minutes, each sentence adding weight to a reality that no one in my family had imagined possible. Colonel Martinez spoke about technology development, strategic partnerships, and classified projects, with the casual expertise of someone who dealt with such matters routinely. Most importantly, she concluded, I want your family to understand that Jessica's work contributes directly to American national security. The systems her company develops help protect our military personnel and advance our strategic interests around the world. Her career represents exactly the kind of public service that makes our country stronger. When she finished speaking, the silence stretched so long that it became uncomfortable. My relatives stood frozen in various positions around the backyard, faces reflecting stages of shock and confusion as they tried to reconcile the woman they'd just heard described with their understanding of who I was supposed to be. My father broke the silence first, his voice barely above a whisper. Jessica? Is this true? I looked at him standing there, spatula forgotten on the ground, his entire worldview clearly shaken by revelations that challenged everything he'd believed about success, achievement, and what constituted meaningful work. Yes, Dad, it's all true. But you never said anything. You let us think. His voice trailed off as he struggled to find words for the magnitude of his misunderstanding. I let you think exactly what you wanted to think, I replied, feeling years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. Every time I tried to explain what I actually did, you dismissed it as corporate nonsense. Every time I mentioned my achievements, you changed the subject or suggested I find something more stable. Well, thus, my mother stepped forward, her face showing the kind of maternal concern that had characterized her approach to my career for years. But honey, why didn't you tell us the truth? Why did you let us worry about you all this time? The question touched on everything complicated about our relationship and my own struggles with family expectations and professional identity. Because the truth was too big for you to believe. Because every time I tried to share my successes, you treated them like failures or mistakes. Because it was easier to be the family disappointment than to keep fighting for recognition that never came. Colonel Martinez had been watching this exchange with the kind of professional interest that military officers develop when observing civilian family dynamics. Now she stepped forward with information that would make the situation even more complex. Actually, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, there's something else you should know about your daughter's reputation in our community, she said, her tone shifting to something more personal and informal. Jessica is widely regarded as one of the most promising young executives in the defense industry. She's been featured in multiple professional publications, speaks at industry conferences, and has received recognition from organizations across the country. She paused to let that information settle before delivering what felt like the final revelation. In fact, next month she'll be receiving the Defense Industry Excellence Award at a ceremony in Washington. The recognition is typically given to executives with decades of experience. She's the youngest recipient in the award's history. The backyard had become so quiet that the sound of a neighbor's lawnmower seemed intrusive and inappropriate. My family stood there processing layer after layer of information that contradicted not just their understanding of my career, but their fundamental assumptions about success, achievement, and what kinds of work deserved respect and recognition. Michael was the first to find his voice, though it came out strained and uncertain. "Jess, you mean all this time, while we were talking about our jobs and careers, you were running a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars?" "Not worth hundreds of millions," I corrected quietly. "Managing contracts worth hundreds of millions. The distinction is important." Ashley stepped forward with tears in her eyes, her voice carrying the kind of emotional weight that family revelations often produce. "I'm so sorry, Jess. We had no idea. All those times we tried to give you advice about finding something stable, all those conversations about getting your life together." "You were trying to help," I said, though the words felt insufficient to address years of accumulated misunderstanding and dismissive treatment. "You just didn't understand what you were trying to help with." Uncle Bill, who had been pontificating about corporate jobs just minutes earlier, looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. "Jesus, Jessica. When you said you worked for a government contractor, I thought you meant filing paperwork or something." "I know what you thought," I replied, not unkindly, but with the directness that years of frustration had earned. "I know what all of you thought. That's why I stopped trying to explain." Colonel Martinez checked her watch with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing multiple priorities and competing demands. "I should let you folks process this information privately, but Jessica, we do need to discuss the implementation timeline for the new contract. Would Tuesday morning work for a planning meeting?" "Of course," I replied, automatically shifting into the professional mode that had become second nature over years of high-stakes negotiations and complex project management. "Should I bring the full development team or just department heads?" "Department heads initially. We'll want to expand the team once we've established the basic framework." The casual exchange of professional logistics seemed to underscore the surreal nature of the entire situation. Here I was, in my parents' backyard, where I'd been called useless just minutes earlier, discussing multi-million-dollar government contracts with a Pentagon official while my family watched in stunned silence. After Colonel Martinez left, promising to be in touch about media coverage and award ceremony details, my family and I stood facing each other across a gulf of revised understanding and accumulated years of miscommunication. My father picked up his spatula from the ground and stared at it, as if he'd forgotten how it worked or why he'd been holding it. "Jessica, I don't even know what to say. All this time, I thought." "You thought I was a failure," I finished. For him, not harshly, but with the clarity that comes from finally having permission to speak truth that had been suppressed for years. "You thought I was wasting my education, my potential, my life on something meaningless and unstable." He nodded slowly, his expression showing the kind of deep shame that comes from realizing you've been fundamentally wrong about something important. "I owe you an apology. We all do. But Jessica, why didn't you fight harder to make us understand? Why did you let us think you were struggling when you were actually succeeding beyond anything we could have imagined?" The question touched on everything complicated about family dynamics, personal identity, and the exhausting effort required to constantly prove yourself to people who should believe in you automatically. Because I got tired of fighting for recognition that never came, I said honestly. Because every time I tried to share my achievements, they were minimized or dismissed. Because it became easier to be the family disappointment than to keep beating my head against your assumptions about what constitutes real success. My mother sat down heavily on one of the picnic table benches, looking like someone who'd just learned that everything she thought she knew about gravity was wrong. "Honey, we never meant to make you feel like a disappointment. We were worried about you. We wanted you to have the kind of life that would make you happy and secure. But you never asked what would make me happy, I replied. You decided what my life should look like, and then tried to push me toward that vision regardless of what I actually wanted or what I was actually achieving. The conversation continued for hours, moving from the backyard to the living room as we worked through years of accumulated misunderstanding and hurt feelings. My relatives gradually departed, promising to call later and clearly struggling to process the revelations they'd witnessed. Michael sat quietly through most of the discussion, occasionally asking questions about my company or my work, but mainly listening with the expression of someone trying to recalibrate fundamental assumptions about reality. Finally, he spoke up with characteristic directness. Jess, I feel like an idiot. All those times I lectured you about career stability and building something meaningful, you were already running a company that makes my accounting firm look like a lemonade stand. Your work is meaningful too, I said, and meant it. It's just meaningful in different ways to different people. The problem was never that your achievements weren't valid. The problem was the assumption that mine weren't. Ashley had been crying quietly through much of the conversation, occasionally offering apologies that felt genuine but insufficient to address the scope of what had been revealed. I just can't believe we were so blind, she said. How did we miss something this big about your life? You missed it because you weren't looking for it, I replied. You had a story about who I was and what my life meant, and you interpreted everything through that lens. When the evidence didn't fit the story, you dismissed the evidence rather than questioning the story. As evening approached and the initial shock began wearing off, we moved into the more complex territory of figuring out how to rebuild family relationships that had been based on fundamental misconceptions. The love had always been there, but it had been filtered through assumptions and expectations that had created distance and disappointment on all sides. What happens now? My father asked as we sat around the kitchen table where so many family discussions had taken place over the years. How do we move forward from this? That depends on what you want our relationship to look like going forward, I said. I'm not going to keep pretending to be less than I am for the sake of family harmony. But I'm also not going to hold grudges about past misunderstandings if we can build something more honest going forward. My mother reached across the table to take my hand, her touch carrying decades of love despite years of miscommunication. We want to know you, Jessica, the real you, not the version we thought we understood. We want to celebrate your achievements and support your goals, even if we don't fully understand them. That's all I ever wanted, I said, feeling tears I hadn't expected starting to form. Recognition for who I actually am, not disappointment about who you thought I should be. The conversation stretched late into the evening, covering territory we'd avoided for years and establishing foundations for relationships that could be more honest and supportive going forward. It wasn't a complete resolution, because relationships built on years of misunderstanding don't heal overnight, but it was a beginning. Driving back to Columbus the next morning, I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret that had separated me from my family was finally out, and while the revelation had been dramatic and unexpected, the result was the possibility of authentic connections that didn't require me to diminish myself or hide my achievements. My phone buzzed with text messages from family members who were still processing what they'd learned. Michael asking about my company's hiring practices. Ashley wondering if I could speak to her nursing association about leadership and career development. My mother wanting to know if she could tell her friends about the award I'd be receiving. For the first time in years, I was being seen and valued for who I actually was, rather than judged for who I wasn't. The success that had felt hollow when I couldn't share it was beginning to feel meaningful again, now that it was recognized and celebrated by the people whose opinions mattered most. The work would continue, of course. The Pentagon contract would require months of intense focus and strategic planning. The media coverage Colonel Martinez had mentioned would bring new forms of attention and responsibility. The award ceremony would establish my reputation permanently within the defense industry. But now I would face those challenges as my complete, authentic self, rather than as someone living parallel lives that never quite connected. The integration of my professional achievements with my personal identity felt like coming home to myself in ways I hadn't expected. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in Washington accepting the Defense Industry Excellence Award, while my parents, siblings, and extended family watched from the audience. My father wore a suit he'd bought specifically for the occasion and looked prouder than I'd ever seen him. My mother had told everyone she encountered about her daughter's achievements, making up for years of worried silence with enthusiastic celebration. The award itself was meaningful, but what mattered more was having people there who understood its significance and who valued the work and dedication it represented. Success shared with people who truly appreciated it felt completely different from success achieved in isolation. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of supporting young people's ambitions, even when those ambitions don't fit traditional patterns or expectations. I mentioned the value of believing in someone's potential, even when their path seems unconventional or uncertain. But mostly, I talked about the satisfaction of finally being seen and celebrated for who I actually was, rather than criticized for who I wasn't. The work would continue, the challenges would multiply, and the responsibilities would grow. But I would face them all as my complete, authentic self, supported by people who understood and valued what I was trying to achieve. That night, at the celebration dinner my parents hosted for family and friends, my father stood up to make a toast that felt like redemption for years of missed recognition and misplaced criticism. "To my daughter Jessica," he said, his voice carrying pride, and wonder that I'd waited my whole life to hear. "Who built something incredible while we were busy looking for something ordinary? We're sorry it took us so long to see you clearly, but we're grateful beyond words for who you are and what you've accomplished." The applause that followed felt like coming home after a very long journey to a place where I was known and valued, and celebrated for exactly who I'd always been. It had just taken everyone else a while to catch up. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.